And it's like confusion and panic and fear and the threats of busyness, and you got all these noises, all this stuff coming around us all the time. So just lately, maybe by happy chance, it was maybe God sent, but in the last couple of weeks, I had an opportunity to watch a 2012 movie of Lincoln and the 2020 movie called 1917. Both war movies about real death and threat and anxiety, family loss, economic loss. And it wasn't just for like Civil War or the war in 1917 wasn't temporary or a few months like just what we're looking at. Really, this is just temporary. I mean, a few months, and yet look how bad that we see it and calling it a crisis and how it's affecting our economy. Yet in those two movies, replicated on actual events, they were going through this year after year of that type of trauma. And we often now look back at them and see how strong they were and how closer they moved to God. It reminds me of 9/11. When I was in Springfield, I knew exactly where I was when towers went down, when I watched that on TV. And I can remember the eeriness of going on a claim outside, an insurance claim outside, looking at a roof and being on that roof and looking up and not seeing the streaks of the vapor from jets. And like everything was shut down, at that time. And again, that panic. And what I also saw from that is God's people rose up. God's people had more services. God's people visited each other. They had prayer things. The God's people came out. They didn't like plan it, and they didn't have some big organization that was doing it. God's people just did what they were following, what God was telling them to do. And they just did it. They didn't have to ask for permission. They did what God put in their heart, what they saw in Scripture, and they just did it. And it went all over. And then by the time things settled down, then they almost went back to the kind of their normal ways. Church attendance kind of went down. You didn't see more prayer groups. I mean, it was like, okay, now that things are under control and now that things aren't crazy, we don't have to rely on God as much. We can just kind of now get back in our own seats. So this is where we are now. This is this uncertainty. This is the opportunity in which we can do these things. We can bring Christ into other people's homes. We can tell them about him. We can use these things, which is great for sharing who God is. This is an opportunity, and maybe God is over a period of time. I've been training for this in a way, and we're going to talk just real briefly here on what that training is and what that means, and with Men on Fire, and what that means to everybody that comes through that door, and how we look at every man that comes through that door as like a gymnasium of a strengthening of us all. And it's not just to pass the time. It's not just to read a book and then forget about it. It's to use it as a bodybuilder would, or you go to a certain job to learn something, to be stronger at whatever you do, whether it's a professor or a judge or a claims adjuster or a teacher or whatever. You continue to train. So why is our Christianity, why is our closeness to being close to Jesus Christ any different? Why can we sit back on our laurels and just think that we're going to, by osmosis, absorb all of what we need to know about how to react when a crisis occurs? And this is just the tip of the iceberg. This is really nothing. Could you see Pearl Harbor when they were bombed, the uncertainty that Japanese could come into the United States, and what happened in a flash? And here we are, and I'm not minimalizing this at all, but comparatively to bubonic plague or what other pandemics that had occurred 2,000, 5,000 years ago, comparative to now, this is a small thing. But because of what we have around us, the social media, the people that are talking out more about what's happening, it's crushing us. And as Christians and as men especially, this is where mine and Todd's heart is on this, is what do we do? Not to tell you that we know any more than anybody else, but what we're supposed to do and what we have been training to do in Men on Fire since even our last study of Mansfield's book. So there are three profound parallels that I saw between the movies and Christians involved with this COVID-19 virus. on one side of it is panic and fear and death and uncertainty compared to the calm and logical and flexible when met with unplanned circumstances. Like in those war movies, they were trained, those officers or those warriors were trained, soldiers were trained, not when they were in battle, but they trained before. They had real live fire, bullets being shot at them, or for whatever training they did with whatever weapons they had. They didn't wait and say, okay, we're going to have this battle. Let's just wait until we have this battle, and then we're going to learn how to load our gun or be evasive or however we're going to do it. So the point is in training ahead of time. And this is eye-opening us on what we need to do from now on, and what we've been doing with Men on Fire since it started 7 years ago. Another parallel that I saw between the movies and Christians in this environment now is they're stalling, not moving, compared to those that move in the heat of battle. So in these movie comparisons, there was one scene in 1917. There was a foxholes, and there were trenches, and they were being bombed. And their job was to be on the offensive and go over out of the trench and then go towards where the firing was going, where the firing was happening, which was against all their natural beliefs. But they were trained to do that. They knew if they didn't move, they would die. Being in one spot, they would get hit, or they would die because they were in that one spot. So they were trained to look beyond their feelings and what they think was right and making a last minute decision on when the bombs are being shot at them, but to rely on their training and to follow through with that. And that's how they survived. And the last parallel was being trained and prepared compared to being untrained and unprepared in battle. And again, I talked about that in training for the battle before, not after. And this why this ministry and a men's ministry that I focus on is so important. And again, every man that comes through that door, we push them a little bit, not to bring platitudes to me or Todd or even the church or Ron or anybody else, but to strengthen you for between you and God, to know what you need to do according to how he gifted you, not how he gifted me or Todd or anybody else. So what we've been talking about this, what to do now and how to train in cases like this before a crisis are three pillars, the Men on Fire pillars. So Men on Fire develop a relationship with Jesus Christ before all else. That's pillar number one. You have to know Christ first, of who he is, hear his voice. And we talked about this a few weeks ago, but to hear his voice and know what that sounds like when in scripture, in meditation, in other men, in nature, and how he created things in our wives and in our children. How do we see and hear God? How do we recognize that, and how can we do it? So with Men on Fire, pillar number one, you got to be with Christ first before all else. And then you can lead accordingly, and then you have a basis for how you should behave. Then pillar number two for Men on Fire, develop a relationship with other godly men in weekly gatherings like today. And every week in a larger group sense, right? You get used to breaking out and going beyond your comfort zone to listen to other men's stories and journeys and gather wisdom from them, and then you invest in them. So it's not a one-way street either way. With Men on Fire and our second pillar, it goes both ways. We, in group and in our journey, do we learn and gather these facts and how to deal with the traumas maybe that they dealt with now, a loss of a child or loss of a job or illness or whatever it might be. We can learn from them and say, okay, that's how a godly man behaves. That's how a godly man teaches and his children and treats his wife and behaves in his culture, to be ready for that and train for that. That's our whole point. Our final pillar, Men on Fire develop a relationship with their own godly band of brothers and meet weekly. I've been doing that for over 15 years. I started in my basement, started with Promise Keepers years ago. It is so important, your band of 3 or 4 or 5 other guys, and more intimately, your inner band, your inner group, that they know you're not impressed by them and they're not impressed by you. So you have that commonality of relationship and bond that is so important. The things that you wouldn't share in a bigger group like this one, that you could share when you meet in that small group. And it's more heart to heart. and where you can encourage each other. That is vital, and that is what kept me alive. So I think where I am at now, and the way I look at this virus, and I look at how I should lead my family and how I should lead my culture, I've learned from those. So it's not new to me. I'm not having to guess on the run. I have some training, some basis to start with, and then go to where God's leading me. The other relationship is in our last study, we did a book by Stephen Mansfield called Mansfield's Manly Men, and his 4 pillars. And again, this is something, if you just stick with these pillars alone, would give you a lot less depression, a lot less anxiety, a lot more to know what do I do next kind of attitude. In his 4, or remember his 4 pillars, what they were? Manly men do manly things, and that's having humility and humor and integrity and all those things. Manly men do manly things. Manly men tend their fields. What is your field? Your home, your house, your car, your family. Things that you are responsible for, that you will put yourself in harm's way in order to protect them. And then number 3, manly men mentor others. They don't be selfish. They look at not just ones within their own family, but they mentor other men and other people outside of their own family and who they are, passing along what they know and their wisdom to someone younger. Then finally, manly men live to the glory of God. Mansfield puts all those together, and the reason he put that last one at the end of, manly men glorify God is ideally, yes, it should be first, but this all comes together when you glorify God, when you follow Scripture and know His voice and go where He wants you to go. That is pinnacle. But he wrote that book because he didn't know what kind of guys were going to read it. He didn't know if they were Christians, not Christians, atheists, wherever they came from, seasoned Christians. Such a variety, but to catch their intention, he started with those and then ended with the most important. However, on Men on Fire, we start with that most important because that is the mentality. We accept all men, regardless of where the religious affiliation is, where they are in their walk with Christ. We start with them. But no, those are our 3 pillars that we're starting on, and that is our basis, and we can train on those. So of these basics of what we have been training you to do and to guide you through this crisis, the question is, will you use them? And that's what tonight's about, and that's what it will every week will be about, that we will preach those same 3 pillars and to train as much as we can train and put God first and not our view or our direction, but just directing you to God first, and that we could be stronger and train others and do the same and replicate that as best that we can.